What is up, everybody? Welcome back here to the Debbie Royale YouTube channel. We're back with another Dynasty Sales edition. Haven't done one of these in a while. What we try to do is find players out there that value does not equal what we think that they're going to be able to produce just because they're on a Dynasty Sales list. And I'm going to say this twice. Does not mean I hate them. Just because they're on here doesn't think they think they're a good player. It's just based on where they're at, market value or tier value. I feel like you can move around a little bit and accumulate some value and still win, right? We're not talking selling to rebuild. We're just talking selling to try to capitalize on their current market value or get out of their market before it completely falls apart. Now, we're going to be looking at 4 players today, kind of going through real Dynasty 12, trades, 12 team super flex, tight end premiums only 1.5. We're going to be looking at ADP right now, kind of looking at where they're going, some values out there, and just kind of going through it. And real Dynasty trades, as always, actionable content of whether if you want to move these guys, who could you move them for, right? Now, our first guy, Rachaad White. We're going to throw up Rachaad White here. He is someone that I have sold personally in a couple leagues this offseason. I liked Rachaad White. Last year, you saw, he was out there. He was kind of around that running back one, late running back one in times of, in fantasy, 990 yards, 6 touchdowns. Has seen his value kind of depreciate a little bit. I think people expected him to use more capital on a running back in the draft, and they didn't do that. So you did see a value bump there. His big thing, though, is inefficiency, right? Was one of the more inefficient rushers last year. You didn't see the volume that probably many thought that he was gonna do. And when you look at kind of his advanced metric, right? Among 49 qualifying backs, he had 42nd missed tackles force per attempt, 40th in explosive run rate, 45th after yards after contact. It wasn't amazing. Just wasn't good where you wanted to be. And from a target volume perspective, wasn't good either. 43rd in targets per route. Didn't really see the targets that you'd want to see from him last year. And that's a problem, right? Because he had one of the best offensive coordinators coaching him, Dave Canales, who's not there anymore. And again, new scheme now coming in. There's a lot of reasons not to like Rachaad White and based on what he's doing. And again, we saw the 70 targets, yeah, but just wasn't efficient. I think, he kind of made up for it a little bit there, but just was not efficient. New system now. Think you have to be concerned with where he's at. Now, if you could pivot off of him, we're going to talk about that and based on his ADP. So if you look at here, here's his ADP right now. So this is a great site. You can find it in the description below. Adecco created his website. You should go check it out, Dynasty Fantasy Lab. And you can kind of look at this. This is all free on his site. Shows you kind of where ADP is right now. So you see Rachaad White sitting there, around James Cook, Jacobs, Isaiah Pacheco, Javonte Williams, Swift, Jonathan Brooks sitting there, Kamara, Monty. So when you look at it where he is going just based on his value, you are having to take him over some pretty good wide receivers in that range, right? Maybe even tight end if you wanted to go Kelsey or Hawk in that range as well. Addison is sitting there. And the issue with I have for White is he is that used car that's already kind of been driven off the lot, and his value just going to depreciate. I see no scenario unless he becomes an uber efficient back where he is vaulting back up into the top 4 rounds of this. Next year, he is going to be around the Joe Mixon range, right? And you could easily trade back, get in that Joe Mixon range, that Derrick Henry, if you're a contender, even that Trey Benson range, and get assets plus to get White. So you're re-rolling plus getting more assets. That's kind of how I look at White right now and his value. When you're looking at trades, again, he's running back 14 and keep trade cut. He's running back 18 here. Rachaad White for Nico Collins. You want to re-roll, go get that wide receiver that plays with CJ Stroud. Rachaad White for Rasheed in a second. Right now, you can get Rasheed in a second because of Rashee Rice's kind of legal issues. I wouldn't mind doing that, grabbing that young wide receiver tied to Patrick Mahomes, plus a second that you could probably use on a running back next year in the 25-second running back class, which is deep. Go check out my running back video there. That could be the move, right? Rachaad for Jaden Reed, Rachaad for a first. If you can get a first for Rachaad, re-rolling is not a bad option there. White in a second for Brandon Ayuk in a third, going up and tearing up at that wide receiver position and really kind of attacking it. White for Brooks. If you can do that straight up, I wouldn't mind. That wouldn't be a bad re-roll. Plus Brooks midway through the year could be one of those guys that you're relying on down the stretch. White for Shakir and Jonathan Brooks. So anything added to that, like I mentioned, if you can kind of trade down. Rachaad White in a third for Trey Benson in a second. So I think Benson in a second is the best assets in the deal. White for JSN, Rome Odunze, and then Michael Pittman. So White does still have value out there because of where he finished. When you're thinking of overall fantasy points, he was a running back 1. However, I do think that his value is depreciating, and I don't love him in that system. He's got Bucky Irving there now, Sean Tucker. I think Bucky is going to get a little bit more run, kind of like similar to Kyron Williams did, right, with the Cam Akers situation. So I don't mind getting out now on Rachaad White. If it's a little early, that's okay, because once you're late, you're not getting the value back. Next guy that I'm going to be talking about, TJ Hawkinson. Now, this is not I hate TJ Hawkinson day. I want everybody to understand that. I like TJ Hawkinson. Now, when you think of the last year, he had 95 receptions, 127 targets before the injury, right? His ACL, MCL, 906 yards and 5 touchdowns. He was very, very solid last year. Now, the issue I have is Hawkinson is almost 27, coming off that knee injury, playing with a rookie quarterback or Sam Darnold with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. I think that there is a realistic scenario where Hawkinson is kind of at his peak right now at tight end 7 in terms of that dynasty value, because there's been a resurgence in the tight end position, right? When we take a look at the tight end position right now, based on startup ADP, you got Laporta and McBride sitting there. And then as you kind of go through Kincaid, Bowers, Andrews, Pitts, then that next tier is where you see Hawkinson. Now, at current ADP, not terrible, but the issue is, do we ever see Hawkinson kind of jumping any of those guys ahead of him? All younger, right? If Pitts has a good year, Kincaid tied with Josh Allen, Laporta has got to assert himself as that tight end 1. When are you going to get that back? When are you going to get that value back? Next year, we could see another guys as Colston Loveland from Michigan, some other tight ends coming there. Jake Ferguson could be the wide receiver 2 on Dallas this year. What if he bumps ahead TJ Hawkinson in that system? So I really think now could be the time to move and pivot. There are some guys where you can kind of, looking at just ADP, maybe looking and saying, okay, who can I trade back for that I think could have similar production? Now, we don't know when Hawkinson is coming back. So many would say don't sell now, just wait. But what if he comes back? That offense is struggling with JJ McCarthy, and really Addison has dominated, and he's shown that he can be that wide receiver 2 there, and with Justin Jefferson there, and then we don't see that production come back. I think it's a risk too to wait, because I think just waiting for Hawkinson to bounce back could be fool's gold a little bit. Now, as far as trades go, TJ Hawkinson for Drake London. Remember, 1.5 tight end premium here. But if I could get Drake London right now for TJ Hawkinson, I would probably do that pretty fast. Hawkinson for Bryce, Jahan Dotson. That's more of a risk. But if you need a super flex quarterback, Bryce is kind of that range, that quarterback 18, 19, 20 range. Hawk for Tua. Again, if you need a solid QB2 that's going to get a contract, Tua is about to get a fat contract from Miami, then you pretty much have the Jared Goff effect. He's going to have that value there. Rico Dowdle and Hawkinson for Mark Andrews. Again, if I can tier up and I just have to add Dowdle to Hawkinson for Andrews, you do that. Hawkinson straight up for Pitts. This is just I'm going to roll Pitts one more time, right? That young player, though, in an offense that Kirk Cousins has shown to be able to establish TJ Hawkinson like he did. He could do that for Pitts as well. Hawkinson, the 207, 307 for Trey McBride. So you're paying a little bit up there, but I'm pretty comfortable at the 207 and 307 moving off of those guys. For a guy like McBride. Hawkinson for Barkley. Don't love that either way, but if you do need a running back and you're kind of solidified, maybe you hit on a Kincaid, a young guy, and you can pivot off of Hawkinson, that's fine. The question is, if you're going to move Hawkinson, make sure you have someone in that, at least either the top 1 through 5 guy, 1 through 6, or at least that 12 mark when you're looking at that value. So if you're looking here at the dynasty value, where I'd be comfortable pivoting off of him is probably around Ingram, maybe Cole Kmet, depending on what you think, but Ingram in that range. So if I can kind of move him for Kittle, Njoku, Ferguson, Ingram for plus, and it'd have to be a pretty solid plus there for Njoku. But I do think Ferguson is a great kind of target with Hawkinson here. Other guys, Hawkinson or Jameson for Worthy in a first, if you can get a first back for that. Moss and Hawkinson for Levis and Jaden Reed. TJ Hawkinson for Hunter Henry and Jonathan Brooks. And then this last one I think is an interesting deal. Hawkinson, Mike Evans, for AJ Brown, for CeeDee Lamb and David Njoku. If you want to go get CeeDee Lamb and you can kind of go get that wide receiver 1 there, I'm a pretty big fan of that. Now, when you're looking at Brock Purdy is our next guy. Now, before these San Francisco fans who are crazy about Brock Purdy coming after me, I am not a Brock Purdy hater. I think he's very solid right now where he's going. QB 14 in terms of that value. You see his keep trade cut value there. Had a very solid year last year. You liked him. He had that success there. He led all NFL quarterbacks in yards per attempt, passer rating, QBR. He also led the league in touchdown rate. So you saw that. He was very there. Now, he did benefit from that system. Ayuk, Debo, Kittle, McCaffrey. Now, could he move? Could Debo be moving on? Yes. Could Ayuk be moving on? Yes. Kittle's getting older. McCaffrey's getting older. So there is kind of a shelf life for him. But he, when you're looking at it, he finished his QB7 in fantasy scoring last year. Now, he probably a top 12 guy where he's going. The thing with Brock Purdy, the reason why he said he could be a sell. If you have him, you're probably pretty comfortable. The question is, though, what could you maybe tier up for him, right? So, when you're looking at where the QBs are going right now, like that, I kind of cut it off at like possible QB1 possibilities, right? So you have Richardson there, then you have Herbert, Love, Murray. Then that's where you really get that tier. To me, it's Murray, Lawrence, Daniels, Purdy, Dak, Tua, Drake, Goff, and JJ. I think that there is an interesting case where you could say that you could maybe tier down to Dak, right? Going at that QB 15, 16-ish range and down there, and then getting a plus asset back, and you'd be really happy with that. Even probably Tua Tagovailoa. If I can get Tua for Brock Purdy plus an asset, I'd be okay with tearing down a little bit. And then Jared Goff coming off that contract extension in that offense, you have to like that as well. You could probably get plus something there, and you'd be pretty comfortable. So again, this isn't about Brock the quarterback. I think he's very fine, but I think it's more about the tier. Where can you manage that tier and move around that tier and get assets, right? So for example, if you want to go really up, you could tie Purdy and AJ Brown for Caleb Williams. This next one, Purdy, Eric on a first for Kyler Murray. If you think Kyler Murray can bounce back, which he is set up for that, to be a top 5 quarterback in this league for fantasy again, I don't mind doing that and tearing up and having to give up Purdy all in a first, which should be a late first if you're contending. Purdy, James Conner for Waddle and Dak Prescott. That's the deal I'm talking about right there. To me, Dak and Brock are kind of a wash. Dak was QB3 overall and QB5 in fantasy points per game. And you have Jalen Waddle there for Connor. You could build to that wide receiver position. I know Dak's a little older, but he's not that old. He's going to get a contract again with the Cowboys. I guarantee it as a Cowboy fan. You'd be pretty excited with that. Purdy and Baker for Kyler Murray again. Brock Purdy in a second for Justin Herbert. So you can tier up to Herbert if you believe in him. And all you got to do is add a late second. I think that's possible. That's why I'm saying he's a sell, because there are ways you can tier up to these guys. Brock Purdy got also traded straight up for Joe Burrow after kind of this nonsense about his elbow. What is that going to look like? Purdy on the third for Jordan Love. Purdy for Jared Goff and Mark Andrews. So in tight end premium, you get Goff, who could be probably that back end kind of, high end QB2, maybe back end QB1, and you got Mark Andrews, right? So there's ways to tier these guys and kind of pair them, and you'll get your assets that you really like. Brock Purdy and Amon-Ra for Pickens and Josh Allen. So really getting that tier up at Allen, and it's still getting George Pickens. And yeah, you're moving off an Amon-Ra, but you still have that value there. Purdy and Hawkinson for Anthony Richardson, and then Downs, Purdy, Trey Benson for Anthony Richardson. So a couple deals there. If there's any way you can kind of pair like a Purdy and Hawkinson for Anthony Richardson, I think you do that. There's a reason why I put Hawk on this list as well. If you need that elite quarterback that has top 5 upside, Anthony's your guy, and you will really like that over a Brock Purdy. Last guy that we're going to get into is Stephon Diggs. Now, people are probably going to roll their eyes. Of course, you're going to sell him. But this is one of those things where you have one last opportunity to get out, right? Traded from the Bills all the way over to the Texans. This might be your last time. The one number that stands out to me is he had 160 targets last year. When I think about that, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm dumbfounded about the season that he had. 170 receptions, 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. What was bad was from weeks 10 to 18, he averaged 7.5 points per game in half PPR. That was absolutely terrible. He's 31. He's going to be turning 31 this season. You see that big drop off. Sometimes guys just drop off, right? With Tank Dell coming back healthy, Nico Collins being there, even Joe Mixon possibly being there, Dalton Schultz, all the areas that you see with the Texans. To me, it's a no-brainer, especially when you look at his ADP. So if you look and find him there, I love that kind of that tier that he's going in terms of like, some guys that can target. You could go young with Ladd McConkey, JSN, Jaden Reed, or, take the better older player, Devontae Adams. Mike Evans is even probably a better target there. And then when you're looking down, if you keep going, Cooper Kupp went after, Stephon Diggs is going after him in Dynasty right now. Man, if I can tear down from Diggs to Kupp and anything extra, I'm totally okay with that. I think that's the right move, right? And once you get to those bottom range, that 10th round, you see Watson and Godwin, those guys. Don't love tearing down that far, but I don't mind tearing down to the Kirks, the Kupps, and those areas. I would definitely be trying to tear him down, or even Scary Terry, right? Terry McLaurin, we talked about him as being a buy last week. You could definitely attack him and go get plus asset, right? Now, here's some deals out there going for him. Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen for Bryce Young in a second. So if you need a quarterback in Superflex, Bryce seems to be that the kind of the guy gets traded all the time for these guys. Diggs in a third for Josh Jacobs. Diggs a second for Aaron Rodgers and JSN. Stephon Diggs for a 25 first. And then you have Diggs for Tank down a second. Diggs in second for DJ Moore. That's a great tier to get into, that DJ Moore tier where you're pairing that asset there. Diggs and Chubb for Chubb and Singletary. Don't love that deal. But if you need some running back to help and you like Singletary, and I do like Singletary this year, could go there. Diggs and Terry McLaurin for a third. Again, getting that plus side. I really like that. Tony Pollard in a second. Don't really want to be buying Tony Pollard, but I like to show trades on both sides so you can kind of make that determination. Diggs in a second for Chase Brown and T. Higgins. Man, if I can get T. Higgins in any way for Stephon Diggs, even if I have to give him up a second, then I get Chase Brown, who could have some volume there in that offense this year. That's a pretty good move. And then Diggs for Rashee Rice in a third. I still think there's an opportunity to go buy Rashee Rice. I'm still okay buying him at his price. And now you can kind of get a third plus now for Stephon Diggs. And Rashee Rice, after he comes back, could finish higher than him in fantasy points per game. I'm aboard that train. I think Stephon Diggs, this is your time to get out if you have him on your roster. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Little Dynasty sells, kind of talk about it. And again, remember, just because I said he's a sell doesn't mean I hate the guy. Doesn't mean that I want him off my roster because I think he's terrible. I just think that there's some market values to be exploited and some ways to maneuver around that ADP and go gain assets and keeping your fantasy points and your hopes alive. Don't mean you have to sell to just rebuild. You can sell to contend as well. So appreciate you guys tuning in. And as always, I'll check you guys in the next one.